Well, it's time to get real about real IDs, that is. After May 7th of this year, people age 18 and older who want to travel domestically by air and enter certain federal buildings will need to present a real ID or a valid passport. Holly Edgell is the managing editor at the Midwest Newsroom, and she's with us now to explain what all this means for residents. Holly, welcome back. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
So, talk to us about real IDs. How exactly are these different from, say, your standard driver's license or ID card?
Sure. Well, these cards are standardized in their makeup across the country, although each state will issue its own. Basically, they're designed to be tamper-proof, counterfeit-proof, more secure. The documentation required to even get one has a higher bar. So these are going to be what back in 2005, when this was first conceived, would be foolproof or close to foolproof ways to make sure that the people who present themselves in airports or federal buildings are who they say they are.
So, yesterday, when I was getting ready for this segment, I pulled out my driver's license. It's on the Kansas side. But how can you tell if, in fact, you have a real ID as opposed to a standard driver's license?
Sure. Well, it's pretty simple. In the upper right-hand corner, there'll be a gold or yellowish star, and that will tell you. And if and when I got my temporary real ID, so when I went to renew in Missouri, I went ahead and got my real ID, but of course it takes a little bit for them to mail it to you. And in the meantime, they gave me my paper copy, and it said not for use for real ID. So you don't have a real ID until you have that card with the star on it.
So, if people listening to you talk about this are starting to think they need to get their act together to get a real ID, what sort of documents do they need?
Sure. Well, in past years, you may have only needed one document to show your address. Now you need two. Those should be utility bills, most likely. You'll need to show a document with your Social Security number on it. You will have to show your current valid ID or passport or birth certificate. And it's extra level of work for people who have changed their names, for example, through marriage. You will have to show, for example, your marriage license, your birth certificate. And that's a bit of a leap for some people. Even the two utility bills in your name, because they have to be in your name, is a bit, that can be a scramble.
Wow. So I've been hearing about this deadline to get a real ID for years now, but it seems like the federal government is pretty serious about this looming May 7th deadline. Do I have that right?
That's right. After many delays, again, I mentioned this was first conceived in 2005. The first implementation date was 2008. That came and went. It took until 2020 for all states to even start issuing real IDs. And then COVID happened, and so we saw the deadline pushed again. So finally, this is it. We've seen no other communications from TSA or the Department of Homeland Security that this will change. And even state officials I spoke with say this is the real thing.
But to be clear, May 7th won't be the last day that anyone can apply for a real ID, right?
That's right, and that's causing a lot of confusion as well. May 7th is the day that you will start to need a real ID or your passport, as you said, to fly domestically or go into like a courthouse, a federal courthouse, or other federal buildings. You can still apply after that, but if you're planning on traveling, say, on May 8th, and you don't have any documents, you don't have a passport, and you only have your normal, regular driver's license or state ID, that's where things get sticky.
You know, almost all licensed Nebraska drivers and identification card holders now carry real IDs. In Missouri, by contrast, only 45% of people have them, Holly. In Kansas, 86% of people have real IDs. Why all these discrepancies in numbers around the region?
Sure. Well, it's hard to draw exact parallels, but the state officials I spoke to, for example, in Nebraska, I mentioned just now that 2008 was the first implementation date. Nebraska, despite that date being moved, they started just simply issuing real IDs at that point. So they started in 2009, and now they have nearly everybody who needs one has one. Interestingly, both Missouri and Illinois, which are both below 50%, they waited until 2019. So you're starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
Kansas started in 2017. State officials there said they promoted it heavily in public service announcements within DMV offices. They just continuously offered it to people in an overt way to get them to consider. And in Iowa, 2013, again, a very high adoption rate, probably closing in on 80% this week, because as of last week, it was 76%, and they had a rush of people coming in. And they, again, 2013, they've had a few years to get this done. Nobody will say that it's because people started earlier in these states, but there seems to be a pattern there that if you implemented this as a state earlier, there's a higher adoption rate.
Right. You know, it's not lost on me that around the country, about 60% of the country's driver's license and state ID card holders have real IDs. You just mentioned this notion of a mad rush. Is there going to be a mad rush in the next few days here before this May 7th deadline?
Well, I don't think there'll be one in Kansas or Missouri. There is one in Illinois. Illinois is at only about 35% of adoption rate as of last week, and those DMVs are being inundated. They even opened up a Real ID super center in Chicago that processes up to 1,200 applications a day.
Wow.
And those state officials told me that they've been really heavily promoting this for over a year, and yet they're still seeing this rush. I think it also has to do with people thinking that after May 7th they won't be able to get one, which is not true. You can get one. May 7th is just the implementation date. So Iowa did report to me that they had quite an uptick last week. They had their biggest week for ever issuing real IDs the week before last. Missouri is a pretty steady pace. There's been no big uptick. And Kansas, there's been no big uptick.
I was going to say, you don't get a big sense in Missouri with this low adoption rate that there's any rush here at all.
That's true. I spoke with the director of revenue, Trish Vincent, and she said that she thinks that, people are pretty well informed about who needs one and who doesn't. You don't need a real ID to drive. You don't need a real ID to show your age, for example, if you're buying alcohol. And so if people don't think they need one, they're not going to get one.
Yeah.
And she also feels like there is some skepticism about the degree of documentation. She said they will retain all the documents that you show in their system. And she thinks that Missourians may not be comfortable with that.
So if someone listening has questions and maybe is interested in pursuing a real ID, where can they go to get more information?
Sure. Well, the states have pretty good information on their DMV websites or whatever their office is called within that state. They will tell you what documents to bring. They will tell you what documents are not acceptable. I know that in some states they've put on extra hours and extra time. I don't think that's been necessary in Missouri and Kansas, but I recommend that you, figure out your documents beforehand, make sure you have those, and give yourself some time in case there is a little bit of a push. There's still a couple weeks, and so people in Missouri might decide they want to get that real ID.
Right.
And there's a story online right now that I've put in the links for the states that I mentioned, including Kansas and Missouri. And I think that there's a DMV I love here in the St. Louis area that they don't even let you go in to wait your appointment until they've made sure you have your documents. I love that.
Yeah, right.
So if you have that DMV in your neck of the woods, that might be the place to go to double check. But certainly, don't wait until the last minute, even if you think you can get that done.
Well, that story that Holly just referred to, you can see it at KCUR.org. Holly Edgell is the managing editor at the Midwest Newsroom. That's an investigative and enterprise journalism collaboration that includes Iowa Public Radio, KCUR, Nebraska Public Media, St. Louis Public Radio, and NPR. Holly, thanks for the update on real IDs. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.